Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest Webern recordings. Yes, one of you suggested I do that, and I think slightly sarcastically, actually. There was like, after I did Schoenberg, why don't you do the 5 greatest Webern recordings? And I was sort of like, yeah, you think it's a challenge? Actually, it's quite simple. This is one of the easier ones to do because, well, first of all, when people play Webern, they generally take it very seriously, and they do a good job. So there are plenty of excellent Webern recordings. Second of all, he didn't write so much music, so they're not hard to find. And thirdly, there are Webern specialists out there who are really very good. And so, this was sort of a no-brainer. Actually, and I think probably a lot of you will agree. But then we'll see your lists and we'll see how it goes, because the selection is somewhat limited on the one hand, and on the other hand, really very, very high in terms of musical quality. First, so here we go. First, Webern's complete works, Boulez on DG. I could say, no, you have to pick one piece, 2 seconds long. But it doesn't make any sense, because if you want all of Webern, Boulez did the complete works twice. First for Sony, and they were very good, but not as great as his far more polished and considered later version. And the later version has everything. It's got everything he wrote, everything he thought about writing, everything he may have written but didn't actually commit to paper, everything that he dreamed about. It's all there. I mean, it's transcriptions and the whole deal, not just the works with opus numbers. And so it's extraordinarily complete and extremely well done. And who are we kidding? It's hard to do much better, although I have preferences for individual works. But if you want to just get everything by Webern, get the Deutsche Grammophon Boulez box and go to town. You've got everything in really, really fine performances. And, Boulez was the perfect exponent of Webern in a way, because, if you actually got the individual volumes of this set, they were very nicely varied. You got vocal things and solo things and orchestral things, and they were designed to highlight the entire emotional gamut of his music from A to B. And Boulez's emotional gamut was maybe from A to A and a half, but he stretched himself to B in order to do Webern, and it's really a very, very fine set. Next, now we're going to start taking this stuff apart a little bit, because there are, like I said, many great recordings by fabulous artists, people who specialized in contemporary music, or people who were just unbelievable musicians and believed in the importance of the work. So first, chamber works, the quartet for clarinet, tenor, sax, piano, and violin, pieces for violin and piano, and the little pieces for cello and piano. Tashi, featuring Peter Serkin and friends on RCA. Absolutely fabulous performances. They were coupled with works by Takemitsu originally, and you also get the piano variations, Opus 27, and a wonderful performance, but more about that in the next selection. Tashi's work was really fabulous, and had a tremendous following, and created a certain mystique around Webern and his music, because it became sort of a thing for avant-garde musical stoner people and whatnot. So there you go. Next, the piano variations, Opus 27. Webern's greatest piano work, and it's Maurizio Pollini on Deutsche Grammophon, a legendary recording, originally coupled with the Boulez Second Sonata and Stravinsky's 3 movements from Petrushka. And it was like, oh my God. We heard that and we said, wow, here's a guy who not just can play this contemporary stuff, but who really understood what he was doing, with the exception, of course, of the Boulez Second Sonata, which apparently Boulez told Pollini was all wrong or something like that, and gave him a nervous breakdown. It's very typical of the avant-garde. You have to remain avant, which means that, not only is the music supposed to be incomprehensible, but no matter how good the performance is, it can't be very good, especially if it makes the music comprehensible. Anyway, Pollini just aces, the Variations, Opus 27. And so there you go. I mean, that's another totally great, certainly one of the greatest Webern recordings out there. One of the greatest piano recordings out there. It's a phenomenal record. Next, the orchestral works. Well, the orchestral works, Dohnányi in Cleveland on Decca. This was a strange release because originally the Webern orchestral works were couplings to Dohnányi's Mozart symphonies. You know, that was one of those, intellectual masturbation episodes where people think it's nice to include the first and second Viennese schools because they're supposed to sound the same or part of the same school, or I don't know why they did that. Anybody who wants one is likely to want to listen to the other. But in any case, after that was all done, they took the Webern stuff and stuffed it all on one single CD, and it's fabulous. I mean, the performances were always great. I mean, they're just amazingly precise and sensitive and transparent, and just wonderful performances. And it gives you all the Webern orchestral work that you need to have, all on a single convenient disc. Of course, when they put it on a single disc, and they never even released it in the United States. I mean, Decca was just ridiculous about stuff like that. It was obnoxious. Their last. This is when Decca was tanking, and their treatment of the Cleveland Orchestra was just horrible. Remember, they started that ring cycle with Dohnányi, which was probably a mistake, but I mean, they stopped it after Valkyrie because it was expensive and they weren't going to sell any. They weren't even going to attempt to sell any. It was really, by then, the record labels, the major labels, had lost the ability to go for an interesting new project and actually try and sell it. So this thing came out and then it sort of disappeared, but it's in the Dohnányi box and it's fabulous. And then last, but certainly not least, not in the tiniest bit least, the complete works for string quartet with the Quartetto Italiano on Decca, formerly Philips. Now, this record, oh my goodness, is it marvelous. This was such a wonderful way to get people to approach Webern, because you have this group which is known for its supreme polish, extraordinary musicality, exquisite sensitivity, elevated standards of taste. They did all the basic quartet repertoire, and they did it superbly well. And then they take on this music, and they do it with just the same qualities. Now, you see, this is the kind of thing that works, that was the right way to do it, as opposed to sticking the orchestral works mixed in with Mozart symphonies, the way those Dohnányi recordings did it. Because here, if you had followed the Quartetto Italiano, because they were just so marvelous, and you had their Beethoven and their Schubert and their Debussy and Ravel and their other stuff, then you could get the Webern and hear the same timbral and musical and musicianly forces at work in repertoire that couldn't have sounded more different. And I think it brought a lot of people along with them. That's what great artists do. You can do it by doing strange programming sometimes, but better is this way. They just made the most beautiful Webern string quartet album you'll ever hear in your life. And it's certainly one of the 5 greatest Webern recordings. And so there you have it. The 5 greatest Webern recordings. Now, I'm very interested to see what you guys come up with, particularly if it's extremely different from what I came up with. But I have a feeling that if you really think about what the greatest ones are, there ought to be, in my mind anyway, a fairly clear consensus, at least about some of these. But we'll see. We'll see. I could be wrong. All you Webernians could be lurking in your hidey holes, waiting to just come out and dazzle us with your sensitivity and extraordinary discographic perspicacity. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.